You ready for me, Melissa? All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Lee Merriweather. I am a Houston AARP volunteer. As you may know, AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people 50 and older to choose how they live as they age. AARP Houston is proud to sponsor Mindful Mondays. With over 3.4 million caregivers in Texas, AARP is dedicated to providing resources and information on those caring for a loved one or for a friend. There are Prepare to Care guides that you can download. Those guides have information on a plethora of things, some to include information on taking care of yourself, checklists, medication charts, and contact lists, to name a few. Visit aarp.org/caregiving to download your guide today. You can also visit aarp.org/Houston for more virtual events and resources in your community. We can be found on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at AARP Texas. I will put the links and information in the chat. Again, thank you for joining us today, and it's so good to see everyone, and good to see you again, Melissa.
Muting is good. There we go. It's good to be working with you as well, Lee. So Lee and I have done, I guess this will be our third or fourth time to do this together. So it's a real pleasure to work with you. I am, as you can tell, or you might have heard it or had to click accept, we're recording this session. So unless you mute, I've actually pinned myself and I'm the one doing the recording. So unless you unmute yourself, you wouldn't be on this recording. If you do, just be aware that your image may come up on there. So I might encourage you, if that's not something that you want to happen, that you either take your camera off. You could also rename yourself to keep anonymity, and you could type in the chat box as another way to communicate. I do enjoy doing this meeting style. So if you're watching this on recording, I hope you'll join us live next time. But it is such a wonderful experience for me to be able to look at you and see your face, and to be able to connect. And so I've noticed also a lot of you are repeaters. So you have experienced mindfulness with me before. So I am Melissa Smith. I actually am in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I moved here, gosh, it's almost 5 years ago now, to be closer to my dad. He's in great health, but I'm his person. So it feels like I've come home to be near him. And it's such a gift to be able to go on walks with my dad. It's also a gift to have some space for my dad, to have that sort of healthy balance of father-daughter relationship. But I'm the long distance caregiver of my mom, who is in Dallas. And that's been ongoing for quite some time. And it is, and I'm also a former long distance caregiver of my stepmom, who had early onset Alzheimer's. And so that's what began all of this. About 10 years ago, I started a nonprofit where we served caregivers with Alzheimer's and other dementia, and offered wellness tools and opportunities for caregivers to kind of just like figure out who they are without all the doing, without the caregiver hat. You know, what role did they really miss? And what role, I'll ask you, what role you really miss today? Our whole theme for today is caring for the caregiver. And, you know, the saying that you cannot pour from an empty cup is absolutely a saying that I think was made for caregivers. And I hope that today that you're able to walk away with at least one nugget of something that resonates with you. You know, not everything will. I always like to look at this as sort of like a buffet of experience. You can kind of take what feels good or put it in your back pocket or leave the rest or let somebody else do the dishes. Like, it's really about you and your experience today. So that said, how you arrive is also important. So I'll encourage you, if you're multitasking, if you're trying to do 3 or 4 things at once, that maybe at least for a portion of this, that you're able to maybe set that aside and allow it to really have your full attention. And that's a really key component of mindfulness, which is where we're going to begin today. So I'm just going to scan before I move forward the meeting chat. So if you arrived after we had suggested adding where you're zooming in from, and also what brings you joy, but I also suggested that it didn't have to be joy. It could be like something that, it feels pleasant to you. Sometimes it could be just something that feels neutral. But it's important to recognize even those differences because we're required every day of our entire lives to hold 2 different things at the same time, to be aware that there's a war in Ukraine and also go for a walk outside and we have the privilege of safety, right? To be able to hold those 2 things, to care for someone who could not or cannot care for themselves, whether it's by choice or whether it's by circumstance that we have to, and also to indulge in our favorite food or a cup of tea, right? There are these things that we do all day long, and to be able to hold 2 really opposing things at the same time is that secret to regulating our nervous system. So, yeah, college baseball. Okay. Aurora, nice to see you as well today. Yeah, crossing things off the checklist. Feel free to add any tips on how you're able to do that. I feel like today, my list just keeps growing and crossing off isn't happening. So I can relate. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Ooh, I don't know if you see my spinny thing, but my computer is trying to decide if it's going to let me, hold on. Well, if anyone can relate to the spinny circle of, I don't think my computer is going to die, but if anyone can relate to the spinning circle, that's what's happening right now. So I'm going to carry on without pulling up my presentation. We're going to do a lot of experiential today. So today will be a lot of just hopefully practical and ways that you can practice different mindfulness tools. So one thing I wanted to address right off the bat, when we think about caring for ourselves, it has become incredibly commercialized, and I almost bristle a little bit at the word self-care because it is so just sort of tossed out there and commercialized these days. And also it's full of privilege. For me, self-care and the importance of it isn't always necessarily the destination. Let's say today, to take care of yourself, you decide to go for a walk, but it's also all of the intermediary steps that you took in order to get to the walk. You had to plan, you had to ask someone to help you, you had to clear some space, you had to put your shoes on, you have to, there's all of these things that required care and attention. And I think that's really important for us to recognize that self-care isn't always just that single act itself, but it's in the nurturing and in the practice of planning the care. And that's so valuable because I think sometimes, and I'm very, very much generalizing, there's all of well, I'm the only one who can do it right as a caregiver. See if that phrase resonates with you. You may not say that out loud, but it might be a thought that you have. I have to, I want to do it. And sometimes that has a control element, and it means that it comes out the way you want, right? Sometimes as a caregiver, which sometimes makes things a lot easier. Or I don't have time. There's no time. And I love, there's a Buddhist meditation teacher, Tara Brach, and she has a phrase which I love, and it's, there's no time to rush. And so we tend to think that everything has to be right, or I checked off that list. But in reality, there's probably only 2 or 3 things that absolutely have to be done. So how do we reorganize and use that nurturing care for ourselves to make the steps towards something that is really going to edify and nurture us? It doesn't have to be a big grand thing. So the difference between I would say wellness and well-being. Wellness is how we hope to be. It's this optimal sense of ourselves, and it doesn't mean optimal weight. It doesn't mean even optimal health, because many of us have illnesses and chronic things that we live with and that may never go away. It means meeting our bodies exactly where they are today and having a measure of acceptance for that. And well-being is an embodiment of presence. So very different. I think wellness, and again, it's sort of a tangential of that whole self-care world. And it's a wonderful thing to move toward. And it's about embracing kind of how we are exactly as we are and doing those nurturing steps to live a life that feels healthy. It may not look healthy to others, right? Because we have this image of what self-care is, of what a healthy body looks like. But healthy bodies come in all different flavors, right? And there is not an optimal way there. But it's a matter of how we feel. And that feeling is the embodiment of presence. And that is well-being. I'm going to see if my spinning circle, feel free to type in the chat if anyone has any questions or comments. Let's see if it's okay. It worked this time? Okay. Give me a thumbs up. Thanks, Lee. And Lee, I'll leave you to watch for folks if there's still anyone entering in. Yeah, so to recap, that wellness focuses primarily on the physical health. Well-being is this holistic alignment, and it's, I feel, embodied presence. So our focus today is really going to be on mindfulness tools, and mindfulness is not about what you're doing, but it's how you attend to it. It is your experience of it. And so I think there is this misnomer that mindfulness is like meditation, but actually I would look at mindfulness as like this big giant bucket, and meditation is one tool of mindfulness. And I would say that within the mindfulness bucket, there could be so many different things. And I would love to hear, as I'm starting to define mindfulness, if you want to put in the chat, and especially if there's something that surprises you about it, what you do that you feel is a mindfulness practice. So for example, it could be reading with focused attention. In other words, you're not creating a to-do list as you're reading, but you're actually immersed and fully present. I just finished, there's a great book called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. It's a fiction book. And she used to be a young adult author. And by that, I was hooked. And it had been a long time since I really felt immersed in a fiction book, and it almost felt indulgent. I don't know if you can relate to that, but where I wanted to sneak away and read little segments of it, it felt that good. Gardening can be a mindfulness exercise. Walking can be mindfulness. Essentially, it's not what you're doing, but it is how you're doing. So how am I attuning to it? It's the experience itself and presence. I love this quote because I feel like this encapsulates a lot of my definition of mindfulness. And it is that moment in which you recognize something happening. So there's a stimulus, And then there is a pause or space between, which gives you a choice to either react or respond. And when we can respond, that pause creates mindfulness. I'm going to take just a moment to look at the chat. Doing a puzzle. Yeah, I did a lot of those. I've never been a puzzler and I'm not very good at it. But I did a lot during the pandemic. And it almost became like this challenge for me. So I really appreciate that. Using all my senses while walking. Yeah, Suzanne, you do a lot of, if you've heard of forest bathing, it's like walking out into the forest and really immersing yourself in the sounds and sights of nature. Laura says walking her dog. Yeah, absolutely. Some of you, I don't enjoy cooking. Some of you really get, I've got a really dear friend that she gets lost in it. There's this sense of full absorption. She's really paying attention. She has a lot of joy that comes out of it. Not me, but I enjoy partaking. But she does it with this sense of full awareness and presence. So another way to phrase it is an alert mind, a quiet body state, fully present to what's happening in the moment. Let's pause and do a little experiential if you're willing. You can be however you are. In fact, if you've been sitting all morning, feel free to stand up. Feel free to move it just a little bit before we start. It'll just be a very quick experiential. But consider taking your eyes just a little bit off the screen. It's busy, right? And you don't, hopefully if you are able auditorially to hear, that you can do that. I know we don't have closed captioning on today, but we can look at that in the future. So whenever I do these experientials, a lot of times there is an assumption of accessibility. And so I will ask you in advance to make accommodations for yourself in a way that makes sense. So if I say, for example, your right hand or your left hand or your feet or what you're sitting on, I make assumptions that there is some mobility there. Please make adjustments. You can substitute another body part, and you can also use imagination as opposed to any movement itself. So I really appreciate you accommodating and making those adjustments for accessibility. So taking the eyes just a little bit off the screen, relax your arms toward your lap, or you can relax them toward the table, whatever you have in front of you. You can keep your eyes open if you like, or you can close them or take a low gaze. If they're open and you're able to look out a window, or if you have something that's soft or pleasant to look at, or fairly neutral, that's always a good idea. So just narrowing down distraction. And then take a moment to notice anything or any tension that's arriving in your face. So allowing the space between your eyebrows to soften, maybe separating your teeth, your jaw to soften, and then keep trickling down. Let the shoulders soften a little. Maybe notice if there's any clenching in your belly or around your chest. Can you imagine that melting or softening? You could even place a hand on any of these places just as a tactile response. And then for just a moment, imagine rubbing your hands together. So don't actually rub them, but just imagine rubbing your hands together. Imagine what that might feel like. The sensation, is there warmth or coolness? Any tingling? And then go ahead and let that go. And then notice what you're sitting on. So if you're standing, notice your feet. If you're seated, notice your seat. You can even kind of rock side to side, but just notice the weight of the pelvis down into the chair. So just bringing your attention to what we would call a grounding. And now go ahead and take your hands and rub them together. Notice any warmth, any coolness. You can even just gently massage if that makes sense for you. But notice the hands rubbing together and the experience itself, any sensations that are arriving. Maybe there's a sound to it. And then when you're ready, let your hands relax. And notice any differences. Was there more sensation when you actually experience the hands rubbing together versus imagining it? Is there more or less aliveness in actually rubbing the hands together? And what feels really alert for you after doing that? And when you're ready, you can bring your eyes back to the screen. So mindfulness is like that exercise, right? We can have thoughts about things. We can have thoughts about going for a walk. we can even imagine things in our mind, and our imagination is incredibly powerful. We'll do another exercise later that'll show you that difference. But doing it, experiencing it, that is mindfulness. When there's that element of what we would call somatics or living aware. So being able to feel something from the inside. And that doing, right, helps us to embody that experience of presence. We're not thinking about rubbing the hands together. We're not thinking about the future, right? It's actually happening in this moment. So feel free to add in the chat box how that experience was for you. And I'll check that. So I would be remiss to not talk about really the benefits of this. It creates, right, awareness, which we just did, some actual tactile awareness. Mindfulness helps develop self-compassion and kindness. And it's the self-compassion and kindness element comes in the pause, right? When we, instead of letting our emotions be the forefront and our responder, then we have an opportunity to pause and allow the body to catch up to the mind. And then we have a choice of how we respond. And that is a form of compassion. Compassion has, and we're going to talk about this in later sessions, but it has an action component to it. So when we think about empathy is our ability to be to companion with another person, and to be able to hear, not just listen, but to truly be able to hear their experience and find some way to relate. And compassion actually is that ability, right, to offer that emotive expression of compassion, which can be in the form of kindness or thoughtfulness or sensitivity. And it has an action component, which I really appreciate understanding the differences in those, because caregivers can really understand that action component of compassion. And we don't always have it, right? Sometimes it's just what we have to do and we need to get through the day. But what if we had, right? Instead of working from that empty cup, we take some moments to say, it's okay, you're not doing this perfectly. It's okay that it just gets done or doesn't get done. It's okay. Like, it's that self-compassion that enables us to offer compassion to others. And it's the pause that enables us to do that. Non-judgment, tricky one. We'll address that in some future weeks, but it has to do with that thought process. Connecting to common humanity. All of us have come together today to see how we can nurture ourselves so that we can be available to others. It strengthens our awareness, it decreases stress, it improves impulse control, strengthens relationships, it improves heart rate variability, it lowers your blood pressure. I mean, I could go on and on about the physiological aspects of mindfulness. Mindfulness is actually, out of all of these wellness and well-being tools, including meditation, mindfulness is now one of the most researched and well-studied modalities that there are, and it's incredibly powerful, some of the results that they're seeing. So let's go into a few more practices. I'm going to pause here for a second to see if there's any questions or any reflections so far. I mean, pun intended, the pause, we're pausing. No. Yeah, tough crowd. Okay. All right. So with the pause, there's a couple of practices that I do that I find really helpful. So I'm one of those that actually need cues for things to help me remember, and also to make things a practice or a habit. So I'll offer just a few. Again, this is a bit like a buffet. One of the practices that I do as a pause is when I change rooms, whether if I'm in the house all day or I'm in an office setting, or even if I'm going from car to grocery store, or from my car to an office, or to my dad's. Anytime I'm changing environments or changing rooms, I'll actually pause. So sometimes I'll even touch the doorway. It's like, okay, remembering that I'm moving into another space. So it's almost like, if you've ever, my first car was a standard stick shift. Anyone else burned down my first clutch when I was 16? No. Okay. So it's like that. If you've got an automatic, it does it for you, but it's that changing of the gears. Is there a way that you can refresh yourself in an instant by doing something that can remind you that you need to change gears? So an example might be if you're caring for a loved one and they're in a particular room. Before you go in that room, you enter that threshold. There's a sigh. There's an exhale. You've done whatever you need to do. When you exit the threshold, as a way of completing a task and being able to reset yourself. So one of the benefits of a sigh, and we're going to talk a little bit about the nervous system in the coming weeks and sort of the science behind it. But our nervous system can reset in a lot of really amazing, simple ways through a swallow. So you can try that. So drinking water. So if you have some water, I might encourage you to take a sip now. I happen to be drinking coffee. Yeah. But it works the same. That swallowing reflex is a nervous system. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with someone who's a little nervous and they're swallowing a lot, can see their mouth getting a little bit dry. Maybe the next time that you have a conversation with someone, and you might notice how often they're swallowing, how often you're swallowing. It's the body's way to regulate itself. Yawning is also another one of those. So you can actually make yourself yawn. And it is a little bit contagious. Whew, I noticed my shoulders drop. What did you notice just then? A little softening in my chest. Yeah. Separating the teeth, sighing, big exhale. Have you noticed? I used to have a friend, she sighed all the time in our conversations. She had no awareness of it. It was just this constant thing that she was doing to recalibrate her nervous system, and it was autonomic. So when we think about the other ways to pause that are also autonomic, it's breathing, it's exhaling. So a super simple formula for that is my inhale is stimulating, my exhale is relaxing. So you can do it with me. Inhale, notice there's an aliveness. Exhale, notice there's this automatic sort of melting, grounding sensation. So the other secret to that formula is, so inhale is stimulation, exhale is relaxation. And the longer we make our exhale, the more that we change that formula toward calming the nervous system. The opposite is true. If I pick up my inhales or I begin to just really focus on chest breathing, which is kind of what we do sometimes in a stress state, we're all up here and that's all that's moving. We tend to rev up the nervous system, right? So it can also work in your favor. You're very tired. You need to recalibrate. You want to wake up. Big inhale, right? That refreshes the body. And a long, slow exhale brings the body back to that homeostasis. The breath, and we'll talk more about this in future weeks, but the breath is the one autonomic thing that you have power over. So you have the power to pause and do all of those little things. So I think I mentioned at least 6 there. So there's the swallow, sigh, exhale. There is a yawn. There's just simply moving the jaw. And I would say the last part of that in terms of, the neck, throat, and mouth, and as a quick reset is your voice. I don't know how many of you have belted out your favorite song in the car. Am I the only one? Just a few? Or in the shower? Craig's not going to admit anything. I don't know your kids. I promise I won't tell them. But belting out a song, right? Using our voice and vocal cords. There is so much research that talks about singing being a regulator. They've done a research study on choirs. And within an hour, a choir's heart rate, a whole chorus of people, their heart rates will synchronize by the end of the hour. And even, I would imagine, shorter than that. Their breath together, their expiration together, and everyone's heart rate variability goes in sync. It's pretty amazing. So let's think about that pause for a moment. If you have a pen or you want to write it down, any of these tips I highly recommend. If there's one that resonates with you, jot it down. Otherwise, it'll be so easy when we turn this off for you to go, and what was that? I don't remember. But if there's even just one that resonates with you, whatever that word or cue is for you to remember that, you can. So the pause, it's doorways, thresholds, moving from one environment to another. When you pause, what you do is up to you. You can yawn, sigh, swallow, exhale, stretch. Sometimes I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor. Sometimes when I finish with a client and I come out of a room, I literally shake and just like pace around the hallway for a minute. And then I'll go back to my office and sit down. The difference that makes is huge for my nervous system. That shift of movement provides that necessary reboot to my nervous system that is even hard to explain. It's a feeling, it's an overall, almost like I took off a heavy weight of the experience and just took it off, and I could be in myself again. That pause is really critical. And I'd love to hear ideas. If any of you have a thought about, you can unmute or you can put it in the chat, a thought about how you pause. If there's something that you do, another thing that I do is the way that I make my coffee. Big coffee drinker. So for me, it's a big ritual. It's a ritual of cleaning. It's like, it's a big pause for me in taking care of myself, and how I even froth. I know I'm a little over the top, but and I have just like the right formula. But for me, that's a big resetting. I'm not thinking about it. It becomes a practice for me. And that's what a pause is about. It's something that allows you to shift or transition from the past, what you just did, to the present moment. No ideas? All right, I'll let you think about it. Gratitude journal on the first day. That's a nice pause. Yeah, nice. Every morning, That's amazing. That's a practice in and of itself, isn't it? All right. So the next one that we'll move into is seated or standing. And we've done a variation of the seated when we did the rubbing the hands experience exercise. So I might suggest, actually, if you have access to stand or the ability to, and that makes sense for you today, that maybe you stand just for a little change of perspective. I'm going to stay seated so that you can continue to see me. But in doing a seated or a standing practice, it's something that we would call grounding. And so go ahead and bring your attention, and if you will, you can take your eyes a little bit off the screen. Bring your attention down towards your feet. So again, seated or standing, both work. And slowly pick up the toes, if you have access to that, of one foot, and then put it back down. And then you'll switch, pick up the toes of the other foot, and then put it back down. So if you've ever been a toe tapper, this might feel excruciatingly slow. Pick up the toes of one foot and put it back down. The other foot and back down. If you want to pick up the whole leg, you could do that as well, but just alternating tapping. And you might get slower and slower if you started out really quickly. And then at some point, you can go ahead and just stop or pause. And then bringing your attention to your feet. What do you notice about the sensation in your feet? Is there any tingling, aliveness, a sense of circulation in the feet? Now, some of us may not have that if we have any neuropathy or numbness in the feet, and you can always change to hands or your seat if that's the case. But notice if there is just a new sense of awareness. And then whatever you're doing, whatever it is, notice if your body's asking you to move at all. So you could shrug your shoulders, you can exhale, and if you've been standing, you can come back to seated. And you can bring the attention back. So I'm curious if anyone wants to write that in the chat, how that felt for you, or if you were able to shift your awareness from, right, all of the thoughts into feeling the body. So thoughts are often, right, that we're in constant self-analysis and we don't even know it. And mindfulness is not about being thoughtless. It has nothing to do with that. It's being aware that we have thoughts, being aware that we have a body, being aware of what's happening inside, because then that gives us agency and choice. And through agency and choice, it is power, absolute power. It moves us from autopilot to actually making choices about what's best for us and boundaries and in health. And I could go on and on. All right, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and feel free to comment how that was for you, thumbs up, or if that felt edifying. Okay, so movement. This is a really quick one, and there's two different ways that I do this, and I call this head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Mainly because that's an easy way for me to remember it more than anything. And hopefully that'll be one that'll be easy for you to remember. So one, we can do it in imagination. We actually did this when we started our session together today. And we'll practice that way. And then we're going to take a somatic practice of actually using our hands to touch. So if you'll take your eyes a little bit off the screen, and just bring your attention to the top of your head and notice if you're scrunching your eyebrows or clenching your jaw. So what can you soften that you're feeling tension in the face and in the head, around the ears? and then move or slide down toward the shoulder. So you might even notice maybe you were jutting the chin forward, or not feeling like you have access to your breath. Maybe the shoulders were by your ears. Notice what it feels like just to pay attention to that and let the shoulders drop as if you had sand pouring off your shoulders. And imagine that sand melting all the way down toward the pelvis and the legs. So notice the legs and the heaviness of the legs and the weight all the way into the feet. So head, shoulders, knees, and toes. And now we'll do a little more physical practice of that. So you could actually physically touch the head or stimulate the scalp. You could also trace your fingers, because I tend to scrunch my eyebrows. I can physically move that apart. My favorite place where I hold tension to touch is right here at the jaw. And it'll often, my mouth will begin to salivate and I'll want to swallow, which again is a great nervous system reset. I might give myself a hug or a squeeze, raising my shoulders and then letting them go. Oh, that already feels better. I don't know about y'all. And then I'll take my hands, again, if you have access to that, and just slide them down the legs any amount. And just moving the hands down, there's a sense of tingling as I rub my hands down the legs. There's a new sense of awareness in the legs. You can slide all the way to the feet. You can wiggle your toes inside the shoes or tap the feet. And just notice that took 60 seconds, right? And so what is the body feeling and sensing now? Is there more or less tension, or does it feel the same or more relaxed? So just really noticing. And part of the, if you want the secret ingredient, part of the secret of mindfulness is noticing the difference. When we notice the difference, or even if it's super, super subtle, that's actually the little dopamine hit that we need to continue the practice. So when we begin to think about cultivating a mindfulness habit, it has to be repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated for it to really take effect. And we want to do this when things aren't elevated, when things aren't super stressful. And if you're doing it or practicing it when things are a bit calmer, your body then can kick it in and do it when it needs it. And I think you'll surprise yourself. So my son, he's a curfew, 17, and he came home past curfew last night, and I sat down and chatted with him, and I was like, so tell me what that was all about. And he's like, wow, Mom, you're awfully calm for 11 o'clock at night. Not my normal response at 11 o'clock at night when I'm worried about my son driving around aimlessly with friends I don't know. So I was like, hey, all righty, thanks for noticing that. I appreciate it. And so just having him notice that in me is enough motivation for me to continue that practice of how can I arrive and how can this be a better conversation? All right, let's do one more as we're winding up our practice together. This one is a simple noticing meditation, and many of you may have done this before. Some of you may, this might be the first time, but it's a really common mindfulness one, and it's one of my favorites in terms of really helping you get present pretty quickly. And so I'll ask that, again, just take the eyes just a little bit off the screen. And before we go into the noticing practice, let's sneak in one more skill. As you're looking straight ahead, or whatever you're looking at in your room, Notice how far you can see in your peripheral vision. It's almost like you're trying to take a landscape of it without necessarily turning your head right and left. So just noticing how wide you can see. And notice what's happening in your body as you kind of look more to the peripheral. So our body is conditioned to seek safety. And by taking a wider view, you're actually, without even doing anything extra, right? Like, this isn't complicated. You're automatically flipping a little switch in your nervous system. You do it probably a lot when you go into a new environment. You take a look around, you kind of suss out, and you probably don't even realize you're doing it. But taking that wide view, anytime you start to feel narrow-minded, narrow-focused, hyper-focused, hyper-vigilant, wide view can just automatically take the nervous system down a notch. So now take a moment to see if you can pick out, and you can do this with a lot of different things. I'm going to choose a color. See if you can see 5 things that are blue, and you'll just name them. So look around your environment and see if you can find 5 things that are blue. If another color resonates with you, feel free to choose another color. Or if colorblind, pick an object, 5 different objects. All right, once you've gotten those 5, then see if you can notice or acknowledge 4 things you can touch. So 4 different things. I always usually choose my clothing because it's texturally interesting. Sometimes what's in front of me, my desk is smooth. I might notice that. A pen, maybe my mug, the texture of it. So when you find 4 things, and then pausing to really allow yourself to notice 3 different sounds. So checking in and see if you can find 3 different sounds. And this one may or may not be a little harder. 2 things that you can smell. And if there isn't a strong smell coming at you, you can manufacture it. I've got an orange nearby, so you can smell that, or a candle, or if your tea has an aroma. So 2 different smells. And then moving a little closer to the interior of the body, noticing if there's a taste inside your mouth. So mine kind of tastes like coffee. Maybe if you brushed your teeth, feels minty. And then complete your practice with just a nice long exhale. How many of you were doing your grocery list while we were doing that? Probably no one, I hope. Right. So this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Moving through the senses is a beautiful way for us to touch in with what is happening, what is our experience right in the moment, and to keep us from moving into the future or back into the past. And I find this one really, really helpful if you tend to experience anxiety, right? Either a new environment, or you start to notice the heart rate increase. I used to do this automatically when I was a kid. I would look out, I don't know how many people stare out windows anymore, but I would look out the window and I would count trees, or I would count cars. I mean, I can vividly remember doing this as a kid. And it was just one of those things that helped me regulate when there was arguing in the car, or things that were
Okay.
not useful. I love, Sarah, that you asked if they were okay. I hope they are. All right. So I will do one last, if we're not experientialed out, today. Does that sound okay? One more for the road. And then I'll ask for just a minute of reflection from everyone. So nature. And looking at my screen, if you're familiar with photos of Mount Fuji, this is Mount Fuji. But let your eyes fall into the screen and try to take that wide view. So try to take in the whole landscape all at once. Notice what that feels like. And then allow your eyes to gravitate to something that feels interesting, something you're curious about, something that feels beautiful or different. Where does your eye go? And as you're allowing your eyes to soften, imagining they're relaxing back into the eye socket, as you continue to begin to take in maybe more details or another detail that you're curious about, notice if your breath is slowed. Notice if your shoulders have dropped a little bit. And as you continue to take in the landscape, is there anything that feels different than when we started gazing or being curious? If this feels really meaningful to you, if you're still resonating well with just being curious about nature and observing, then you can continue that. Otherwise, for the next 30 seconds, take a moment to jot down a few things. It could be, you can draw a picture, you can journal, you can write a few things or write what you remember about our experience together today. If there was something that resonated with you, you could write how it made you feel. Maybe if there was an emotion that came up or if there was a sensation. But we'll take, starting now, about 30 seconds to just reflect. All right. For the sake of our recording, I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to those that are watching us on recording and encourage you to join us in person next time if you can. But I'm glad that you watched the recording. And